It's Jennifer J. Hammond, and I'm so excited. We have Lindsay here today, and we are going to talk about that work from home. You know, it's a completely different viewpoint on looking at real estate. Are you working a remote job or not? Lindsay, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
I'm so excited because I think it's so important, with COVID and the pandemic, everything really shifted. And we had lots of people who left the city and then because they weren't going to work from home. And then we had lots of people who ended up running into the city after the pandemic. But we have so many people who are working from home now, and it's changed the way that people look at real
Mhm.
estate. So let's talk about a little bit about that work-life harmony, because if it is all in the same house, especially if there's a couple, a husband and a wife, and they're both working from home, both people can't be in the same space, obviously, because you're going to be listening to each other's calls and Zoom calls and that kind of stuff. So how do we get that harmony?
Yeah. So there's a lot of different things that people can do. Obviously, having space helps, right? I'm very fortunate because I had, we had a home office that I could use, and my husband could use another room when the pandemic hit. But where I think the work-life harmony piece comes into play is, for much of my career, I've worked in Los Angeles, which is a big commuter town. And so I used to have a good 45 minutes to an hour to decompress from my day. And it's very different just taking 5 seconds and opening the door and entering family life, or, people knocking on your door. I need a piece of paper, whatever it is.
Yeah.
But it does require a different approach to work, even though you may have the space. If you don't have the space, then that's a whole other approach to work. But really getting in that mindset of, how do I be really intentional about having work-life harmony, especially when my work and life are much more intertwined.
Well, I think so. There are a couple of things. One, I want to say, I think very well said about that transition, because so often people don't realize that that transition is really important. And it's funny because you actually reminded me, I work a lot with veterans, and I like to volunteer with veterans. And one of the things I found when veterans were talking about post-traumatic stress, and or when a veteran is transitioning into a home and they've been with their group, whoever, in the Army, Navy, whatever, and all of a sudden now they're into transitioning into family life, and it's very, very different, and it's a plane ride home. Whereas that one of the things, one of the organizations, they have this thing called walking off the war. And back in the day, I didn't know this, but back in the day, apparently, when like the Greeks or the Romans or whomever went to war, after the war was finished, they walked home for days, if not weeks, if not months. And they called it walking off the war.
Yeah.
So they were with their boy, whoever made it through the war, and they were walking through, and that walk really healed them. And it's
Yeah.
so funny when you said that, it made me think about when you leave, even though that commute is a pain in the butt and blah, 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 you have this separation between work and life, home life, family life, someone asking you for, and it's funny because I also recently, I inherited a cat. And it's funny because of course I work from home, and the cat every so often is very mischievous and just decides to start knocking things off the table. And you're like, wait a minute, I feel like I need to lock you out of the room because you are just going to misbehave and distract me when I'm in the middle of trying to work. And it's funny because I realize not only, like we both discussed in the beginning, a space, you need to make sure you have a space that's really your space, defined for work, not just even for children. And I'm going to go ahead and lump in animals. They don't know the difference. You're just hanging out in the whatever room, and they think this is the time for play, right? This
Yeah.
is the time where mommy's going to give me a piece of paper when I want it. And you're like, no. And so there is that. So one, the defining it, but two, the transition of really having that, that, that transition of whatever it is. And even though it can be shorter, it doesn't need to be 45 minutes, doesn't need to be an hour, but knowing that you need a transition, that, you know, ripping off that Band-Aid again can make some people feel claustrophobic if everything is all the same. It's all the lines are blurred.
Yeah. And it's so interesting that you mentioned the walking off the war, because one of my big habits post-pandemic is I have a giant dog. So if he needs to
Oh,
go out, it is like off the computer, lady, off the computer, lady. But I set a practice of myself of walking meetings, because if anyone didn't need to be face to face on a call and just needed to talk, I was like, I'm taking you on the road, because I needed to get out of the four walls I was in. And also early in the pandemic, I found I have a Fitbit, which is like my, my godsend. And I was like, oh my God, my steps are only the equivalent of like bathroom and kitchen trips. I gotta get back into getting more steps for my own sanity. So sometimes also, if you're in a state where you're working from home, it's a great way to get to know your neighbors. If you have a pet, we have met like some amazing people just through walking the dog and taking my walking meetings. Like we have a joke with some of my former coworkers, because I rescued a couple puppies on these walking meetings. It's like, that puppy has, hold on a second. This puppy has this mischievous look like it's free. And so it's like, I'm going to call you back. And so somehow or another, these walking calls, I'm getting space for me. I'm connecting with my neighbors, getting fresh air, but also saving puppies.
that's fantastic. I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that. And, and if I flip it over onto the real estate side, all of these things should be considered when you're looking for a place, because again, you may decide, oh, I'd like a place, but I didn't think about the fact that I'm going to need a place I could go for a walk and be able to do a walking meeting. And I'm going to also need, and similar to what you were just saying earlier about a husband and wife having a defined space, but also not close to, like I've had, especially in the beginning, the
Yeah.
pandemic, I had so many times where people, they're trying to do their meetings, both of them at the kitchen table or the dining room
Mhm.
table. And you're just like, it doesn't work. I mean,
Yeah.
there's so many reasons it doesn't work. Or the kids are also trying to work at the same table. And you're like, and they're like, oh, I need to keep an eye on them. Well, you can do that with a video, or there are other ways, but you really do need to make sure that you define, and everybody needs to know, this is your
Yeah.
space, this is your space.
Yeah. And the other thing that I would say too is, there was the pandemic remote time period, but now there's the post-pandemic remote time period. And I think some of the expectations have shifted a little bit. But I would offer that, for people who have families, really, sometimes we forget that when we're home, our kids are expecting us to be theirs because we're home and we're around.
Right.
And I've even had this with my husband too, where he's like, I'm working. And I'm like, but you're home.
Yeah, right.
So really being able to have conversations about, I'm in work mode or I'm not in work mode. Because I will tell you, in the early stages of the pandemic, my poor sweet daughter thought I was ignoring her all the time, because she didn't, she
Yeah,
was so young, she didn't she was so used to, when mommy's home, she's here for me.
right.
But there were a lot of other great things that came out of the pandemic. Like one Zoom call I will never forget. I was talking with this normally kind of more serious, buttoned up executive. And he obviously didn't have a home office space. And behind him, his daughter was doing cartwheels the whole call. I was like, he was still, very and what I believe, and very formal, but like behind it, but it was so endearing. That was the other beautiful thing of the pandemic is we got to see people as whole humans.
Yeah.
And so I was able to feel, more connected to him.
It is, and there was one I went on social media that I think is hilarious, where there was a bunch of different newscasters who were trying to have a series because they're zooming from home, and the
Oh
cats
my gosh, yes.
love to get on. My cat, thank God, hasn't done this yet, but love to get on camera, and there's one guy, he's a weather guy, and he's like, well, I was trying to do the weather, but obviously the cat wanted to steal the show, and it just
Yes.
so,
Yes.
but again, it makes us all human because you're like, yeah,
Yeah.
you have a cat, you also know that you don't get to completely control the cat. The cat does whatever the cat wants. And
Yes.
we hope that the cat doesn't completely misbehave and God only knows, because cats are just so mischievous. But same thing with dogs. I mean, a dog can all of a sudden get into a mischievous mode, and then next thing you know, your computer's down, So
Mm.
again, understanding, especially from a real estate point of view, if you're going to work from home, you need to think through all these things. And, is your dog going to be able to be in your space when you're there? Are you going to be able to be defined? Is the dog going to be whining and crying the whole time you're on because they can see you and hear you, but they can't, be right next to you? To really look at all those. And speaking of, so there are different kinds of energies as working parents that play with. So will you expand a little bit? I know we've been talking about the different spaces and the attitudes, but what about the different energies?
Yeah. So one of the things that I talk about in my upcoming book is this concept of, when we're trying to take care of our work-life harmony, sometimes we can over-index on time. And so what I tried to share with people is this concept of energy, right? So time is there are only 24 hours in a day, right? Even Beyonce has only 24 hours in a day. But energy is something that is going to be very unique to us. And so I call out what I call the 3 C's of energy. And when you think about your workday, there can be 3 energies that may kind of fulfill you throughout the day,
Yep.
other than ones that most people would expect, right? Like sleep,
Right.
exercise, food,
Yeah.
right? Those kind of other ones. So one is creative energy. So having time to create whatever that looks like for
Right.
you. Completion energy. So that is one where the one that I always call out is laundry. Like sometimes when I was writing my book and I was like, oh my God, when is this going to be done? And I would be like, I'm going to do laundry. Like I need like a hit of completion energy
Yeah.
for some of that satisfaction. And then the third one is connection. So, and that connection, I look at that in the most expansive way, which could be connection to nature, connection to your neighbors, connection to your family. And so how that relates back to real estate is, it could be a conversation with clients to just better understand how they get their energy, right? Do they want to be in a neighborhood where they can walk around and run into neighbors, or have a local Starbucks where they know the barista, right? Or are they someone who actually really needs a lot of creative time? Well, great. We've got a 3-car garage. One, other clients have used this as an art studio, or, hey, the laundry room is next door to the office. You need some completion energy, right? It's right there when you need it. So anyway, I just, share those as, it's a way to assess for yourself, what am I needing in this moment when you're feeling either antsy or tired or whatnot, what other energies can I tap into to, kind of bring myself back to life.
And I think that's so very valuable, especially when you're a buyer of a home, because you need to know what you need and what you don't need. And so often I see people get into a house and then they're like, yeah, it actually doesn't suit our needs or a lifestyle, because they didn't consider and even things like you were talking about connection, sometimes the connection to outdoors is about how much natural light do you have in the house? How many windows do you have? Can you see outside from your office? What is that like for you? And it's really, really important to know yourself and know your own needs and be able to, it's important to know them, but it's also very important to communicate them. And as a real estate professional, I think it's also important to ask the questions and keep asking, because again, not everybody answers it the first time. And sometimes you have to ask, 2-3 levels deep to get to the point where, oh, but if you don't have a window in your office, you're never going to work in there.
Yeah.
It's going to be a
And
useless
then,
room.
yeah. And then, building on your connection energy too. Do you have an open floor plan? Right? There's a lot more opportunity for connection if people are bumping into each other, right? As they're
Yeah.
going about their time.
And
So,
I can't believe we're already out of time.
oh
So
my gosh,
I want to make sure it went so fast and I had so many other things to talk to you about. So you'll have to come
I
back.
know.
But
Okay, would love
tell
to.
people how they can reach you and about your upcoming
Yeah,
book and social media,
sure.
everything.
Sure. Yeah. So people can find me on LinkedIn. So Lindsay K. Barnett on LinkedIn, and also on my website, www.barnettcoaching.com. And my upcoming book due out in the spring is called Working Hell to Working Well, Making Your Company Work for You. And in that, I have a lot of, tips and actions and things people can take. It's really a practitioner's guide to making your company work for you. And on my website, one quick thing to add right now is I just recently ran a networking challenge on LinkedIn, and I have a networking without the ick guide on my website. So I would imagine a lot of your listeners, whether they're looking for new jobs or looking for new clients or whatnot, especially you mentioned your veterans, some of them may be moving into civilian life and have trailing spouses that, need to network for the first time. So, there could be a lot of hesitations. And so the free networking guide on the resources page of my website can be helpful for people.
Perfect. Oh, that's perfect. Thank you so much. And as you know, I always love to end with a silver lining with a yay. So I'm going to
Yes.
ask you to lift your voice and say yay with me as we go off the air. Is that okay?
Yes.
Okay. 3, 2, 1.
Yay!
Thank you so much.
If you could just help people understand the principles, then they could make better decisions in real estate. We started getting an audience. And so with the radio show, I actually get to help many, many people.
Hi, I'm Jack Canfield. You may know me as the co-author of the Chicken Soup for the Soul series. And if you want more help in getting from where you are to where you want to be, I want to encourage you to listen to the Jennifer Hammond Show.
Let's party.